Good afternoon. This is a little bit like church, you know. And in church, the pews up front and the pews in back. The pews up front are always empty. And if our witnesses will just turn around, you'll see what I mean. Like the folks are sitting in the back pews there. Some of them are kind of young. And I don't know where you ladies and gentlemen are from, but where are y'all from? Minnesota? Oh, good. Well, this is like American Pie. This is good. So we're glad you're here. And for our witnesses, I'd say they have your back. This group has your back. So, well, the subcommittee will come to order, and our thanks to our guests and our witnesses for being here today. For the next hour or so, we're going to discuss ways that President Obama and his team of open government experts can reshape both old and inefficient bureaucratic agencies into lean, not so mean, citizen-focused machines. And we had hoped to hear from our panel of witnesses today a couple of weeks ago, but there were larger issues at play. And unfortunately, we had to take a rain check. As I recall, we had to basically stop our hearing. And for I guess there's a process in the Senate that at the beginning of the legislative day, the leader, majority leader, or his or her deputy will ask unanimous consent for the committees to meet beyond a 2-hour limit. And if we don't get that unanimous consent, we can't meet. And the unanimous consent was sought, was refused. Somebody objected from the other side, and as a result, we had to close down all of our committee hearings throughout the Senate abruptly. And we apologize again for the disruption. We're just glad that our witnesses were willing to come back, and nobody objected today, so we can all be here. But before our hearing ended last month, we were able to hear from one panel, and that was from the administration's top officials who are leading the Open Government Initiative. And I applauded then, I would today, the administration for releasing a guidance to reduce wasteful agency spending, to make senior leaders more accountable, and to improve, we hope, the lives of everyday Americans. It shouldn't be a talking point anymore that agencies should be as transparent and accountable as possible, and change needs to start at the top. When I was the age of these old people sitting, actually these young people sitting out in the audience, to say somebody that they were transparent was not a compliment. And it's interesting today that we want our agencies, we want those that are serving us, we want our legislative process, we want our leaders to be transparent in what they're trying to do. So what was not a compliment today is, and we're very much attempting to be transparent. But now that we have had an opportunity to hear from our panel about, hold on just for a second. Now we've had an opportunity to hear from our panel of outside experts. I hope to finish the discussion we started a couple of weeks ago and learn what areas the administration is doing well, what areas may need some more attention, and more importantly, how making agencies more open and transparent will make the lives of 300 million Americans a little bit better. And just to recap why this hearing is important, every year agencies spend nearly $1 trillion. Think about that, $1 trillion on contracts, on grants, and on loans. Yet it seems like every week or so we receive another report from outside watchdogs. Actually, they're kind of like inside watchdogs, but the Government Accountability Office, which is a federal agency, or from an agency's inspector general outlining significant wasteful and inefficient spending. You expect some of that with an operation as big as the federal government. But there's plenty of waste that still goes around, and the folks at GAO and the inspector generals help us to identify that. But at a time when a lot of Americans are trying to keep from losing their jobs or avoid foreclosure on their homes, we in the federal government need to lead by example and not by exception. I like to tell my staff, if it isn't perfect, make it better. And as we try to focus on doing everything well, I believe that phrase can be applied here. There is more that both the administration and the Congress can do to make sure that we're spending Americans' hard-earned tax dollars wisely, and we need to work together to get it done. The American people demand it. In closing, then, I just want to add that as we discuss all of the new and exciting initiatives that the administration has underway or plans on undertaking in the near future, we ought to keep our eye on the ball. Our job doesn't just end at making information freely available, but in making sure that information can be effectively used to improve services to every American, to reduce wasteful spending, and to enforce accountability. Again, our thanks to our witness to this panel, one of whom showed up wounded. He's coming off the DL, the disabled list, to be here with us today, and we're grateful for that. My statement says I will now recognize Senator McCain for his opening statement. He's not joined us yet, and he may during the time that y'all are here, and I hope so. And if he can, we'll recognize him when he arrives. Again, thank you. Your entire statements will be made a part of the record, and I'll just ask maybe Mr. Is it Wonderlich or Wonderlich? Wonderlich. What a great name! And we're glad that you're here to lead us off. Thanks very much.
Chairman Carper, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. As you said, my name is John Wonderlich, and I'm the Policy Director for the Sunlight Foundation. The Sunlight Foundation is a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to using the power of the Internet to catalyze greater government openness and transparency. We take our inspiration from Justice Brandeis's famous adage, sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. We are committed to improving access to government information by making as much of it as possible available online. Indeed, we believe it's important to redefine public, as in the phrase public information, as meaning online. We focus on creating databases and new tools and websites to enable citizens to get the information they need to be informed participants in our democracy. We believe that transparency and openness are essential foundations for public trust, and that without the former, the latter cannot survive. The Internet is making increased transparency cheaper, more effective, and in higher demand every day as Americans come to expect instantaneous and constant access to all kinds of information. Given the rapid technological advances in how information can be captured, stored, analyzed, and shared, this is the time for government to rethink how it makes information available. There are three core principles for establishing an open and transparent government. First, transparency is government's responsibility. Transparency must first and foremost be understood as the responsibility of our government, since private and nonprofit responses can only reach so far. Second, public means online. So whenever the government has committed to making information public, the standard for public should include freely accessible online. Information cannot be described as truly public if it's available only inside a government building, during limited hours, or for a fee. Third, data quality and presentation matter. The Internet has redefined effective communications and publishing, and is now an around-the-clock open medium in which now standard practices include continuous dissemination, permanent searchability and reusability, and other key features. So why are these improvements in government transparency so important? First, transparency is the basis for informed participation in self-government. The public has rising expectations of greatly expanded access to government information so that they can play a fuller role in understanding, evaluating, and participating in the workings of their government. Our role as citizens is only as strong as our government is open. This idea is not an abstract, distant kind of public good. The actions that make up our civic lives, informed voting, active participation, or analysis, these all depend on access to public information. Without that connection, citizens are left disconnected and dispirited, and substance and dialogue are replaced by apathy and divisiveness. Second, online transparency can create accountable and efficient spending, something that governmental bodies in cities and states and here in Washington are just now starting to discover. Third, when government makes data public, it can foster whole new businesses or industries. President Obama's Open Government Directive recognizes this potential, noting that information that may, quote, create economic opportunity should be given special priority. And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, open and transparent government is accountable government. Open information allows us to check what government is doing with our tax dollars and for whom. Sunlight's vision is one of a rich, vital public sphere where politics is driven by dialogue and fact, and merit drives decision-making in government. In that spirit, we are pleased to help shape the new policies and technology that will allow us all to benefit from a stronger democracy, creating new platforms and databases to inform and engage citizens, empowering journalists, lawmakers, and public officials, investing in our social infrastructure to demand and make better use of government information, and advancing the bold and responsible policies that will ultimately open our government. So, thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's your story? You're going to stick to it? Good enough. I failed to introduce Mr. Wonderlich before he began speaking. And I'll just say just a couple of things. Is it true that you're the policy director at the, I want to say, Sunlight Foundation?
Correct.
And is it true that Sunlight Foundation is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to openness and transparency in government?
Sounds right.
All right. Is it true that in this capacity you work with the Congress, you work with agencies and the public sector to develop smarter policies that help reform bad government practices?
Indeed, yes.
And that's why we asked you to be here today.
Thank you.
Okay. And our next witness is Steve O'Keefe, founder of, you call it Merit Talk? Merit Talk. It's like take the word merit, append to it the word talk. And that's the name of the entity that he represents. You founded it, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah. How long ago?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. And before that?
Been working in the public-private domain for about 20 years.
Yes. Where did you learn to speak English?
That was in London.
London, okay. Yeah. You speak it better than the rest of us, I think. So.
Well, differently, maybe.
I did an interview this morning on Fox Business Network, and the guy who was interviewing me was British. Kept asking him, "What are you saying?" I was wondering what I was saying. No, we actually had a kumbaya moment. We actually agreed on something. It's pretty amazing for both of us. I'm told that Merit Talk is an online community of technology experts that focus on leveraging technology to improve the way that agencies operate. I understand that you task this community of experts to grade the administration, give them a grade, leading up to our hearing, and that you will report back the results today. And just one question before you start is, do you grade on a curve or is it?
No, it's not graded on a curve.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, good. Well, you're recognized. Please proceed. Thanks again for being here.
Chairman Carper and subcommittee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you here today. My name is Steve O'Keefe, and as you mentioned, I'm the founder of Meritalk, the government IT network. Meritalk is an online community that fosters public-private collaboration and dialogue in the government IT community. First, I'd like to congratulate you on the innovative format for this hearing, breaking it into two parts. Seriously, while the separation between government and industry panels was unorthodox.
I just want you to know, Mr. You forgive me for interrupting, but I just want you to know the room is just emptying out. Moments after you started to speak, everybody got up and began to leave. But we have a new group here from Delaware that are here to bolster you, and they're here to cheer, so go right ahead.
It's probably because they can't understand me. So as to say, apart from everybody leaving, I wanted to congratulate you on the unorthodox format for this hearing, breaking it in two parts. Here we are in the reloaded section. While it was unorthodox, it did provide us the opportunity, candidly, to connect with some of the people that spoke in the first panel, the government experts, and engaged in some very meaningful dialogue. Just last week, I met with Vivek Kundra at OMB and with Mike Wood at the Recovery Board. We reviewed the results of the Meritalk OGov study, which I'm going to present in a minute or two here, and exchanged perspectives that will help shape the path forward on both sides of the equation, both government and industry. Real, meaningful public-private dialogue. Perhaps this should be the format going forward. We should stop every hearing halfway and reload it.
Now, did you happen to engage them once the hearing had to stop? Is that when you all had a chance to talk?
Yes.
How fortunate! That's
yes.
Great. Well, we might want to do that more often.
I think it could be the new thing.
It could be.
So I'd like to begin by noting that President Obama's Open Government Directive is not a stroke of the pen initiative. If you'll pardon the hyperbole, it's analogous to President Kennedy's challenge to go to the moon in 1961. Nobody expected to see a spaceship take off 1 year after the announcement. And if they did, I would put it that few people would have jumped on board to ride that spaceship just 1 year after the announcement. Many of us have had the opportunity to ride on the Open Government Apollo 1. And I think we've had some mixed experiences, candidly. Just over a year ago, after the signing of the Open Government Directive, Open Government is getting mixed reviews. In my written testimony, I talk about some of our first-hand experience trying to build applications on top of the first version of the IT dashboard from OMB, as well as for searching for content on recovery.gov. I guess the net of our experience was that it was pretty frustrating. If I might, the juice just really wasn't worth the squeeze once we'd gone through the process. That said, seeing as this is an open government hearing, we thought it would be appropriate to bring the community's voice into this hearing room. So that's why we hosted the OGov survey on Meritalk prior to the initial hearing, to get the community's read on how we're doing in open government. And with that, let me present a couple of slides here. So the first is, we asked, do you think the government is more open today than it was when President Obama took office? And while 53% say yes, there's a surprising number of people that think that no, the government is not more open, and also a significant number that think that they're unsure whether it's open or not, more open or not.
Interestingly enough, I saw some polling data today at a luncheon presentation, and the president's favorables and unfavorables or uncertain kind of reflect those numbers right there. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it is. Well, hopefully we can get the open government sentiment up, and hopefully get the president's approvals up. That'd be great. Do you feel that open government is providing...
I'm glad you got that in before Senator McCain joined.
There'll be more people leaving the room. So do you feel that open government is providing you with a voice in how government works? And you'll see that 58% of the sample say no, which is interesting. So when we look at this notion of open government as a way for citizens to have a say in how their government operates between elections, we're not really meeting that requirement right now, and I think that's an important point. Then we asked, these are just a few of the questions that we put, but how would you grade OMB's IT dashboard? And what we see is only 4% give that dashboard an A grade. When I sat down with Vivek Kundra, he was keenly interested in this feedback. You'll see that 37% give it a C grade and 21% give it a D grade. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And one of the things I think was very encouraging is a very open path in terms of discussion about what the feedback is. There's no denial from the executives. We asked what was the biggest challenge to O-Government, and the number one point here was management resistance transparency, hardly a huge shock. This is obviously, we're trying to introduce new ideas, and so I think we need a lot of evangelism inside the government and talking about the requirement to civil servants about the requirement to do this, because this is a new way of looking at things. Another point here, 16% said the absence of a proven model and infrastructure for real citizen engagement. So looking at all this Web 2.0 stuff, we're really looking at how to put that together as it evolves and provide something that is really valuable. And then we asked, should the government execute research to identify what citizens like and dislike, what they want and need from O-Government? So if the government is building a product, which is a new role for the government, it will be a great idea for us to have some understanding of what citizens are looking for in open government rather than just building what we think, if that makes sense. So as I mentioned in my opening comments, I had the opportunity to sit down with Vivek Kundra at OMB and with Mike Wood at the Recovery Board since our first hearing. Both of these executives were keenly interested in the results of the Meritalk Open Government Study and, importantly, opened a dialogue about how to improve the state of open government. Vivek Kundra advised that OMB has made significant upgrades to its IT dashboard since we looked at it last year. We talked about the opportunity for better communication with the community on the site's functionality, very important. That said, we took a look back out on the site, and we did find that the platform has much improved. I'd like to present just a couple of slides from that to show the kind of data that is available today on the site. The data is there, the analysis we provided, and there is significant opportunity for public-private partnership going forward in this area. So a couple of quick slides. This is the first one looking at the government's information technology and management spend. This is $40.2 billion with a B each year. And so what we see here is that 64% of that spend is going on maintaining legacy systems, so keeping up expensive legacy systems. And in many circumstances, we might perhaps be better off looking at modernizing rather than trying to put Band-Aids on the existing systems. And this speaks to cloud and many of other initiatives looking at modernizing government's IT infrastructure. We break out here by DoD and civilian, and what you see on the first chart there on the left-hand side is that DoD spends significantly less on maintaining the old than the civilian agencies. So maybe there's a way to look at accelerating that modernization and taking the leaf out of the DoD's book. The next and final slide that I will show you is a further breakdown of that data. And what this shows is information infrastructure maintenance, information management, information security spending. The red is information security spending, and you'll see that far and away the lion's share of information security spending is happening in the Department of Defense. There are red portions on each of these civilian governments' charts, but it's so marginal that you really can't even see it. So sometimes graphing data provides new insight, and our intent is to look at taking data that's being published by the government and repackaging it in fashions that will provide applications and value for the American public. John talked a little bit about this notion of the private sector providing additional value add, and we very much support that notion. We are currently in dialogue with a series of federal agencies to ground source some of the numbers that we pull from the dashboard to find out whether they are indeed accurate. And so we look forward to continuing that dialogue and proving that out. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I await your questions.
Thank you. I thought that your colleague who helped with the presentation on the charts just did an exceptional job. And, you want to introduce her?
Yes, this is Lauren Walker. She's really the brains of the outfit.
Yes, I could.
Helps out in all circumstances.
I was watching her from time to time during your presentation. I could just barely see her lips move when you spoke. So you guys are pretty good at that. So, thank you. Our last witness is actually somebody we've seen around here before, and we welcome him back. Mr. Thomas Blanton. Thomas Blanton is the director of the National Security Archive at George Washington University. Mr. Blanton has been a leading national advocate in reforming the way that agencies classify and protect information. We're pretty good at over-classifying, as I recall.
Yes, sir.
And as I stated during last month's hearing, I understand that you've conducted more than, is it 40 Freedom of Information requests? No.
40,
is it 400? Is it 400? Is it 4,000?
40,000.
It's 40,000. 40,000. That's probably more than anybody around. Well, maybe not, but that's a lot. I just 40,000 Freedom of Information requests. Probably I can hear him say, "It's him again. It's Blanton again with another FOIA request." So that's a lot, and I don't know if you get paid by the FOIA request, but if you did, you'd be well off.
The pharmaceutical industry does about 10 times as many.
Oh, okay.
We're just a small nonprofit media outfit trying to keep the government open.
Okay. Well, we're glad you're here, and thanks for joining our panel again today. I want to apologize for your having to come back, but we're glad that you're willing to. And as Mr. O'Keefe suggested, maybe some real good has come out of the fact that we were disrupted last time and had a chance to have a dialogue that otherwise would not have occurred. So what is it?
I would echo that, Mr. Chairman. Last time I actually got to personally congratulate Vivek Kundra on the CIO Council winning the Rosemary Award, named after Rosemary Woods for her infamous 18-and-a-half-minute gap in the Watergate tapes. And we gave it to them this year, to the Chief Information Officer Council, because although they've been in charge of best practices for government's IT, all that spending that Stephen's talking about, since 1996, they've never addressed the crisis in electronic records and email preservation. And if they can't, on the front end of those billions and billions, put in the preservation and access piece, then none of us are going to have any documents to FOIA request for down the road, and we won't know what our own government's done. So your hearing last time gave me the opportunity to give him my own personal congratulations, but that's the least of it. I just want to make 3 points today, Mr. Chairman. One of them is just the importance of this process and this hearing and this follow-up, because by calling Vivek Kundra and Anesh Chopra and David Ferriero last time, you actually forced some decisions on them. They had to face up and push the agencies to come up with tangible deliverables. And to be able to come here and tell you, we're doing something really positive here. You've got the bully pulpit, and your role, I think, is truly essential to the progress that we are already seeing. I think that's my second point, is I'm more optimistic today than I would have been on March 23rd if you had me on as the panel right after them. And the reason why is between March 23rd and today, those agencies have all deposited their open government plans on the public. And it's a fascinating process to see the bureaucracy itself churning. They've been ordered to do so by the President, by the Office of Management and Budget. And they've actually created interagency processes where some of their best and brightest are trying to come up with ways to make their process more open to the public. They've got systems that are trying to identify those high-value data sets they can put out there. You see this bureaucratic motion happening, and change will come of that. But that's really the third point, which is we're not there yet. It hasn't changed. Maybe the wheel's over. This is Norm Eisen at the White House. He likes this metaphor. He says, we've turned the wheel all the way over with our directives and our orders and our guidance and the memos and the day one pronouncements by President Obama, but it's a supertanker. And so the ship is just barely moving like this. Well, I'm here to tell you today it's not a supertanker. It's actually a fleet. And there are aircraft carriers and there are dinghies. And actually, we've actually found a couple of rowboats, too. And let me tell you, they've got no radio equipment to be in touch with the White House. And they don't know what's going on, and they haven't gotten the word yet. What we released last month was our 8th audit, government-wide, of how federal agencies are responding to Freedom of Information requests. And we did a real simple thing. The President had put out a directive on his day one in office for agencies to get more responsive. Change your Freedom of Information practice. The Attorney General then in March for Sunshine Week last year put out specific guidance to all the agencies saying, change your practice, change your FOIA practice, your regulations, your training materials, change your practice. So we did a simple thing. We filed Freedom of Information requests with all 90 major federal agencies, said, show us, what did you change? Give us a copy of your regs before and after. Give us a copy of your training materials. Give us a copy of your guidance. Give us a copy of anything that you changed in response to the President and the Attorney General. And I can tell you today, 13 out of 90 federal agencies made any concrete change to their actual FOIA practice in that first year. Now, why I'm more optimistic? That made headlines across the country on March 15th. And the headlines were, report faults Obama's efforts at transparency, or agencies lag Obama message. That was Monday morning. Tuesday morning, the White House Chief of Staff and the White House Counsel sent a memo to all 90 agency heads saying, remember us? Change your Freedom of Information guidance, practice, regs, and show it to us. 24-hour responsiveness. And that's, I think, Stephen's experience talking to Vivek and others in this. They're not defensive about it. They want to change it. They need us pushing to change it. They need you holding oversight hearings to change it. They need agencies to get it why it's in their interest and the taxpayers' interest to be more open. And that combination of pressure can actually make the change. But diversity of agency response is the great challenge. We're right in the middle today with openthegovernment.org, John's great outfit as well, where we're looking at all those open government plans and saying what's real, what's Memorex, what's really going to be a change, and what's just promises for the future. And it's a fascinating diversity because some of them are really impressive. I mean, in my written statement, I described my colleague Gary Bass has highlighted the Department of Health and Human Services and saying this is a really impressive open government plan. They got tangible, high-value data sets they're going to have out by the end of the year. They've done this on their flagship initiatives. This is great. Others of those plans just say, well, you know something? We're going to keep planning to write this plan. We'll plan on planning, and we'll plan some more, and then maybe we'll plan again, and we'll give you the plan. And that's great, but it's not openness. You can see how frustrating it must be if you're sitting at the White House and you're trying to turn the ship or change agency practice. Our first government-wide audit was whether Attorney General John Ashcroft back in 2002 had changed the way Freedom of Information requests were responded to. And again, he sent out this memo saying, we at the Justice Department will defend you if you can find any reason to withhold information from the public. We'll defend you. So we asked the agencies, what did you change? Fascinating. 4 or 5 agencies actually had written memos from their counsel's office to their program people saying, This is the end of the Freedom of Information Act. You don't have to respond to any more requests. The vast majority of agencies, 30 or 40 of them, just sent a copy of the memo out to their field offices, but didn't actually change their own regs or practice. And then there were 4 agencies that wrote us back, and they said, excuse me, what Ashcroft memo was that? Could you send us a copy? We never got that one. I can tell you every agency has gotten the Obama memo and the Holder memo. And you can see it in just the responsive process on the FOIA request, and you can see it in the responsive process of the White House. But change, it's still in the future. So let me just end with a suggestion. We're in the middle right now of this evaluation of agency open government plans, which is sort of where the rubber meets the road. My bet is by the end of this month, or certainly by the first or second week of May, openthegovernment.org is going to publish our rankings, ratings, evaluations. We're all volunteering. We've got a whole network of people all pitching in, taking this or that agency, looking at it against a set of criteria. ProPublica just won the Pulitzer Prize yesterday. They're pitching in on this too. A lot of us are doing it. I have a recommendation for a hearing that when those ratings are done, you not just invite openthegovernment.org to present the evaluations, but you pick the 2 best agencies and the 2 worst agencies and have their chief information officer come in and their chief freedom information officer, maybe their deputy head of the department, maybe even the cabinet secretary, and tell you, why are you so good? What's your lesson? What's your best practice? And why are you so bad? And I tell you, I think you will see direct change coming out of that subcommittee hearing. I really appreciate your attention to these matters. It matters so much. And I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks very much for your comments, for your counsel. Thanks for your advice on for what it's worth. Pretty interesting hearing. I have a couple of questions for individuals, but I have a question or 2 for the full panel. And the first question I would ask is for the entire panel, and I don't care in what order you respond, but I'd like for everybody to share at least one thought on it. But one of the reasons we ask 2 panels to testify is to, first of all, provide administration witnesses with an opportunity to really set the stage, or attempt to set the stage about what we're actually working on. And then we invite a second panel of outside experts, that would be you, to provide us some food for thought, to provide just outside the box ideas and observations. In essence, your job is to let us know what the administration ought to be thinking about going forward, or perhaps what they could be doing better. And you've mentioned a number of those already here today. Can each of you tell me 2, maybe 3 areas where my staff or I ought to focus on, like a laser, to help the administration reduce wasteful spending and to improve services to the people we work for? Maybe 2, maybe 3 ideas for our staff. What can we do to help make sure that the administration reduces wasteful spending and improves services to our citizens? Okay, anyone feel free to jump in. John Wonderlich doesn't have to go first. You don't have to go first.
All right.
Others can go first.
You started right in this direction at the last hearing, and I was really impressed by both you and Senator Coburn pressed Vivek Kundra on, okay, when's the subcontracting information going to be up there? And that's a great step forward, because that is where the competitors are going to be able to see what the other folks are up to. That is where you're going to level the playing field some on both the procurement side, but also on the effectiveness side, which is what your question goes to. It's interesting to me, and I'm sure I still remember the Obama-Coburn bill, or was it Coburn-Obama bill? And it seemed like...
It was Coburn-Obama.
Harper. I like
or in Delaware, it was the Carper-Obama.
I like that.
Coburn bill.
I stand corrected, Mr. Chairman.
No, it was Coburn was the lead. Tom Coburn was the lead.
It seemed to me that there was a meeting of...
Barack Obama was just a mere mortal.
Just a junior senator.
He was new. He was a new guy.
It seemed to me there were 2 theories of governance that came together in that bill. And one theory from Senator Coburn is that the more people see of what the government spends, the more they'll see the waste, the fraud, and the abuse, and they'll demand that stop. And there was another theory of that government spending, which is that if people can actually see It's that old notion of when people only vote for bond issues for a school when you can see what the money goes to. If you see what it goes to and you've got some built-in accountability so that there's counter pressure against waste, people might actually support it. They might actually want it. And it seems to me that that argument is a perpetual argument in the American system. I still remember, I think Bill Moyer said the American eagle has two wings, a right wing and a left wing. It's a permanent argument, right? And that's great because that's a dynamic tension. But the commonality is that transparency is the key that will lead to those greater the services. And you can get to that subcontract data. I know it's required by law. I think it's supposed to be all up by October. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah. Then I think we're a big step along the way. I think if you can also reinforce this whole open government process, because I really do see a level of new energy in the bureaucracy now that they've got deadlines that are set. Now they've been tasked by the president and by the budget folks. They are producing some ideas. Some of the ideas are terrible. Some ideas don't go anywhere. Some of them could really be best practices that will directly, I think, address what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. Thank you.
So when the open government plans were released on the 7th, my organization looked specifically at the component of each agency's open government plan and how well they fulfilled the requirement to inventory existing data, high-value data, and identify future data to be available for download. And what we found was, I think, what we expected, and that's very mixed results. Just as Tom was describing, Obama's clear political will to open up the executive branch translates into mixed results when you look at real change within the agencies. So through the lens of did agencies identify high-value data, the results are clearly mixed, and I think we can see some of the limitations of a concrete requirement like Tom was describing. So the first point I would make is to look into the idea of data inventories. On top of the current open government directive, there are existing statutory requirements for agencies to list all the information that they have that have been largely ignored for a decade or more. So I think the idea of telling the public what's knowable about an agency is a very powerful one, and that's why my organization is focused on it. Now, beyond the idea of a concrete requirement, I think one of the untold stories of the Open Government Directive is this idea of encouragement and brainstorming and collaboration. So in the last few days, the White House released this stretch criterias document, which is bonus criteria or things that the agencies should do to move beyond what the directive requires. And I think that's a very unusual and laudable move for the White House to say, you know what, our directive is not comprehensive and it doesn't go far enough. But that's not a failure. In fact, we're encouraging agencies to think about what should come next. And so I would encourage you and your staff to perhaps connect with the idea process that's happening across agencies and some of these working groups that aren't just thinking about what the requirements are now, but what they should become maybe in a 3-year time frame. I think there's a lot of really valuable work being done there. And then the third thing is I would encourage, and this is very much along the lines of what Senator Coburn was talking about at the first part of this hearing, is that the problems that plague usaspending.gov and by extension the recovery website, I think are much deeper and endemic issues than just building a website. So questions of what kind of financial reporting systems have to be rebuilt from the ground up in order for the FFATA bill to actually come to fruition. I think that's a longer term question that's going to take real effort to address, and one that we're looking into finding answers for.
Okay. Thanks very much. Mr. O'Keefe?
I would make a couple of points. The first one is that...
Do you agree with anything they've said?
Not at all, no.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
Got to keep us awake.
But I think that the focus is very much on what data the government is publishing. And I think one of the things we've got to look at is what data is America interested in consuming? And so I think more research on who's interested in this data and what kind of information we should be putting out is very important. I spent about a year or so working at the Department of Homeland Security in the National Cybersecurity Division. And at DHS, we launched a thing called the National Cyber Alert System. And it was a subscription-based service where you could log on to find out what problems were happening on the Internet and what might affect your computer. There were two different systems. There was two different levels. One of them was a technical level. That was for technical people. And then one was a regular level for regular people. And so what I would do is I'd get these messages coming across my desk, and I would call my mother-in-law, and I would read them to her and find out whether she understood what I was saying. And if she didn't understand what I was saying, then I would send her back to Carnegie Mellon. So after about 2 weeks, Carnegie Mellon got very frustrated with my mother-in-law. But what we have to do is understand what is the American public interested in? Who are the audiences for this open government content? Let's look at this hearing. Apart from a lot of the school group that left earlier, this is not a packed house. And so we need to work out what it is that people are looking for from open government and provide that content. The other thing I would say is that it's garbage in, garbage out. And so there's a lot of discussion, and Senator Coburn was quite forceful in terms of this subcontractor issue and reporting subcontractor performance and so on and so on. And the net of it is, if we do not have a better program management system and a more standardized program management system in government, then the data we get is going to be less than optimal, and the outputs that we can produce are going to be less than optimal. We need to do the same thing from a program management standpoint and also from a procurement standpoint. Wouldn't it be great if we had better quality data coming out of the agencies, people coding the same information in the same fashion? So I would say, that yes, we need to look at the information that's coming out of the agencies, but we have to take one step further back and look at how that information is being captured, how we're managing projects in government, how we're managing and recording the procurement process, and also on the other end, who's interested in consuming this data and what are their opinions? What are the outcomes of these efforts, not just the behaviors, which I think are very important.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank each of you for those thoughtful responses. My next question is not for an individual, but really for the entire panel again. And some of you have criticized the open government movement as focusing a little bit too much on inside baseball. Now that we're in a baseball season, we'll use that one. But for example, the previous administration typically focused their efforts on uploading outdated agency reports online that were many times difficult to find and oftentimes more difficult to understand. And although these reports were better than nothing, Americans want transparency into the day-to-day services that they depend on, like Medicare, veterans benefits, tax policy, tax work done by the IRS, or maybe getting small business loans. How will open government help them? How will open government help them? And how do we make sure that we prioritize our efforts to really to help citizens? So, two-part question: how will open government help them? And second, how do we make sure that we prioritize our efforts to help citizens?
I can take a short crack at it. That the way we've looked at the
short cracks are fine.
Short cracks are good. Probably the best cracks.
that works.
The way we've looked at the freedom of information system is it's a kind of market signaling. There should be a kind of market signaling to the government to help answer Stephen's question about what are the audiences, what do people care about, what do they want to get out of their government. And if you look at the largest user groups of freedom of information, according to the agency's own reporting, it's veterans asking about their service records and their benefits. It's senior citizens asking about Medicare and Social Security and projecting their lifetime. And those are in the tens of millions, those information requests. And so the one flip problem is that many of those are personal, private. That's first-party information. They're asking for it about themselves or about their family. You don't put that on the web, or you probably shouldn't, not if it accompanies a Social Security record number, right? And yet there are probably ways, and this is what I think I'm most optimistic about the open government plan focus on tools like dashboards that make the online experience so much easier to navigate so that you can then get to those pieces of information most directly relevant to your own needs, your own life. And if the web can deliver what the promise is, and that the dashboard kind of toolkit allows for this ease, single-click, double-click navigation right to the place, then the system can be far more responsive. But we've got to clean up the freedom of information non-responsiveness of agencies. Do exactly what John and Sunlight Foundation are trying to do, get more of the high-value data sets on the web so people can go search for themselves. Because I can't predict what Stephen's mother-in-law is going to want to know from a given set of files, but it's our obligation.
Can Stephen predict?
And maybe he can't even predict. Exactly.
Okay, just checking.
But if you set up the navigation tool so that his mother-in-law can go to the site herself and poke around, look around, make it as easy as doing an online search in any of the major search engines, then you're at a place where you're going to get the benefit of the wisdom of crowds.
It's a full-time job trying to predict what my wife wants to do, so I haven't spent that much time pondering my my mother-in-law's requests. As far as this notion of how will open government help and how to prioritize, I would put it that research obviously is very important, understanding, what are the priority issues, but maybe that's not necessarily the role for government. Maybe the role for government is to clean up the data, to provide transparency and accountability in order to show the faith in our democracy, to improve the quality of our bureaucracy and the efficiency of our bureaucracy. But by publishing the data in a format which is machine readable and intelligible, as John had mentioned, there's an opportunity to unleash the private sector to develop new applications which will deliver value in multiple veins. So we're looking at perhaps almost a cable television model of applications that could provide value for different segments of the community. And how we work out whether those are actually delivering value, well, they'll either succeed or they'll fail. And so if you look at things, for example, like health or veterans health, why shouldn't pharmaceutical companies step in and underwrite applications that will be written on top of government data which would deliver value to the American public? So I think that the notion of the government developing this complete infrastructure and, from source, from cradle to grave, if you will, in the open government model is not necessarily the way to go. I think what we have to look at is at what point, is the data high quality to begin with? Is it served up in a fashion which is easily navigable? Is it delivering value inside the government? Looking at the priority areas, but then potentially providing the opportunity for the private sector to step in and deliver value add on top of that. And if they succeed or fail, that's going to be largely a product of whether they're delivering value or not.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Wonderlich, you get the last shot at this question.
Thanks. So I think there's this existing, the way things work now, so much of our government's data is collected for the benefit of maybe 10 government regulators. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why that's been the case for so long. For example, the Department of Labor just released as one of their flagship initiatives a unified search for different accountability data, so certain OSHA violations and mine safety health data. And I think that's a great move, but it also leaves me wondering why that was never released before. So if that data is valuable to collect and should have a behavioral impact on the people that they regulate, then shouldn't it have been released to the public in the first place? And I think the mindset responsible for not releasing that is one that says, we know how this data should be used best, and it's our job to fix the problem. And I think what's happening now is there are whole teams of developers, many of which are organizing through our Sunlight Labs, who are chomping at the bit to create new businesses and new visualizations of how power and how our country works and how they can use government data to start to tell those stories and hold people accountable. So on the question of priorities, I agree we have to have priorities about what to open, but I think at the same time we should recognize that we don't have all the right answers, and we should unleash the private sector and the nonprofit sector to help to start to find those answers.
I think that response gives us a pretty good segue to my next to last question. I'm going to ask two more questions, and I'll tell you what the last question I'm going to ask you can be thinking about this is just based on what you've heard your colleagues at the panel saying here today. So to discuss some of the questions, some of the responses to those. Is there anything else if you'd like to either amend your original statements, opening statements, or maybe reinforce or underline, re-emphasize something that you'd said in your opening statements? Just be thinking about that for us, if you will. But the next question, also for the entire panel, and it would be like, I think there's a saying I like to remind my staff when we're considering what the role of government should be in America. And this is not original to me, but I like to say the role of government is to steer the boat, not to row the boat. And people say, what do you mean by that? And I use the analogy of healthcare delivery. In England, for the most part, the doctors and nurses and healthcare folks actually are government employees. And in this country, that's not the case. We have docs, nurses, and so forth who are in the Department of Defense and in the VA, but for the most part, healthcare delivery is not. It's either done through nonprofits or it's done through for-profit entities. But the role of the government is I think, is to steer the boat, not row the boat. And I also like to tell them that public policy should really try to leverage market forces. A couple of you, at least one of you, sort of referred to that here to today. And we ought to really seek to incentivize people to do what's the right thing. In last month's testimonies, Mr. Kondra and Mr. Chopra mentioned setting up prizes and awards for people to compete for if they developed a more effective way to use agency information. And that strikes me as an effective model, interesting model, but a potentially quite effective model that could lead to some interesting results. What type of results are we seeing so far? And is this something that Congress ought to think of expanding in the future? And second, are there other ways we can incentivize agencies to do the right thing before it leads to a problem? So, if anybody wants to take that, we can start with the youngest witness and proceed to the very oldest.
I think that might be me. So.
Whippersnapper, you.
So on the question of prizes and awards, that's a topic that my organization has some experience with.
Like a week in Delaware, right? Would be like the first, second prize would be 2 weeks at the beach.
So we ran something called the Apps for America contest, and it's happened twice, and right now we have Design for America contest going on, and this is really an effort for us to say there's this powerful new force in the country, which is that of the developer, whether working for a business or perhaps on their own, and trying to say what happens when you take those developers and set them free on data.gov, what kind of useful things get created. So things like flyontime.us, which is a web page where you can see for any flight, how often is this delayed? You know, if this is an important flight, should I aim for a different time?
I wonder if we have those for trains.
I don't know if that exists, but if we have,
we'll have to find out.
Then that is
Amtrak I used to run the Amtrak board, and I'd ride the train a lot. Amtrak used to have an ad campaign that was something like this: maybe your next flight should be on a train. So, in Delaware, we have we have airports, but they're very small without commercial airlines. So in Delaware, I like to say all of our next flights are on train. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I think they were going to go with maybe your next trip should be on a train.
There you go. Yeah.
But as from an investment standpoint, we had enormous success with spending something, along the lines of $30,000 in prize money and getting dozens and dozens of applications that you would pay far more than that to have developed. And almost everyone involved benefited from the notoriety of being involved and getting attention to what it is that they were able to create. So we've had some success with the prize model. I'm not sure how broadly that could apply to solving some of government's tougher problems, but I think that's an approach that the Obama administration is committed to experimenting with and seeing how far we can take it. On a similar level, the phenomena of the dashboard, which I think we're seeing more and more of. There's the IT dashboard. There's the OIRA now has a dashboard about pending regulations, and the Department of Justice just announced a new FOIA dashboard. I think those are all very useful things to display what's knowable about a certain behavior. I think we can assume that'll have a strong effect on behavior, and it'll be interesting over the next couple of years to see what the limit is of how much behavior can be affected by displaying it. But I think that experiment is currently underway.
Thank you. I don't know, I'll find out who's middle-aged here, and then we'll go.
Get to the real old guy.
Yeah, there you
go. So I think Voltaire said that perfection is the enemy of good.
No, I said that. Before Voltaire.
Well, you're bearing up well. So I think that the initiatives that are taking place are good. And we need to innovate in order to change, to achieve different outcomes. At the same time, we need to realize that we're going to fail in some areas, and this is not something that the government is very comfortable with. And so one of the outcomes of innovation is failure in certain areas, so we need to develop walls around programs, try new approaches, and recognize they may not succeed. And I know it sounds a little strange to say the government needs to embrace the idea of failing, but I do think that is important. In order to succeed, you have to try again. I think that this notion of prizes is a great idea. And I think wholeheartedly we support the innovation prizes that Mr. Kundra is working on and look forward to working with him on in that area. And at the same time, we need to look at both the stick and the carrot. So the prizes are a great idea. We also need to continue looking at reports that show how agencies are doing. And what I would recommend is that rather than just looking at measuring behaviors, and I think if you look at in information security, FSMA is a perfect example of that, right, where we measure whether or not you put in all this paperwork, but we're not really measuring whether or not your agency is actually more secure. We need to look at...
We do a similar thing in education. When we measure performance in the classroom by educators or in a school or in a school district, we measure a process. We don't measure outcomes.
Right.
Although, speaking of leveraging resources and race to the top, I'm amazed at how effectively the Department of Education through Secretary Duncan has taken about $4 billion, which is admittedly a lot of money, but literally to leverage enormous changes in over 40 states and the way they deliver education. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's right. One of my colleagues has a severely disabled child, and so his wife has to go into the schools with Jack in order to take these tests, and it's critical that the kids actually take the tests in order to get through the process. Of course, the kids can't take the test, so the mother has to put the hand on the button in order to make sure they check the box in order to file the paperwork in order to get the funding. And so really what we have to do is focus increasingly on what are the outcomes that we're looking for and try to measure outcomes rather than behaviors.
I would second those emotions.
Young man?
The prize, yes, I take the Rip Van Winkle prize. Although you're competitive with this Voltaire business. That's pretty amazing. I like the prizes work.
Fred Voltaire is the guy I was...
Oh, Fred. Your college roommate. I was in Bulgaria a few years ago, and they had developed prizes for the government ministries who were the best and the worst at answering public request information. And the best award was called the Golden Key Award, and it was this beautiful, huge skeleton key on a trophy pedestal. Beautiful. The minister showed up to accept it. Very happy. The bad award was not, they didn't have Rosemary Woods to call on, and so for them it was the Rusted Padlock Award, also on a pedestal. And let me tell you, no minister showed up to accept it, but that was what all the newspaper stories led with, was the Rusted Padlock. And I think that's part of the problem with the prize approach, which is the news is the negative, when actually our challenge is how do you accentuate the positive, right? And so that's why I would say when you're looking at constructing hearings, have a couple of bad ones that are sub-performers, but get a couple of the best practices ones. Because the best practices ones, the prize winners, are the ones that prove that the old bureaucratic refrain, it's resources, we just don't have enough resources, is not correct. The real difference between the high performers and low performers isn't resources. It's leadership and will and pressure.
Well, we try to put a spotlight on both the good behavior that we want to incentivize more of, and that which is not so good. All right, now the folks from Delaware are bailing on us, and so it's down to the
thanks, y'all.
Down to the really final few, but we thank our guests for sticking around for the last question. The last question I telegraphed it earlier was just to say. We're looking at what each of you have been saying, and in response, just in your opening statements, but also in response to questions and listening to the responses of others to the questions that have been raised. Is there anything that you want to just to say or add in closing? It can be something new, maybe a new thought. It could be just to emphasize or underline already something that has been said by you or by someone else. And we'll just start, Mr. O'Keefe, with you, if you don't mind.
Right in the middle.
Yes.
I would just close with just really reiterating what I talked about earlier, which is, this is really analogous to a trip to the moon. and it's going to take some time. So, Vivek Kundra was really put to it by Senator Coburn about the subcontractor issue, and I think it's a very important issue, but I think that we have to be practical about what can be done and the time frames associated with it. So if we have program management and procurement systems where the data is not properly parsed and there isn't sufficient fidelity, then it's going to be impossible to get the data that we require. So we need to be realistic about what can be done. I don't mean to say that letting people off the hook is the way to go, but I think we need to be practical. I think that we need to focus on outcomes. So it's not just a matter of publishing data. We want to work out what our priorities are and what we're looking to get out of this, who our audience is. And at the same time, I think that the notion of engaging with the private sector, and by doing that, we allow the government to perhaps insulate it from some of the turbulence and ups and downs associated with getting into new business models, which I think is a great idea. And lastly, I would say that I appreciate the hearing. It's great to have these issues raised, and we're looking for more dialogue with the administration and with the government on how to make this better. The answers aren't going to come from one source. They're going to come from this crowdsourcing and discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Blanton?
I'd like to reiterate something that I mentioned to you when you came down from the podium when we called off that last hearing. And I think I said to you, Mr. Chairman, that first panel of government witnesses was brilliant. And it was brilliant for this reason, that the money and the power was at one end of the table, Mr. Kundra's end of the table, and the legal responsibilities were in many ways at the other ends of the table with Mr. Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States. The National Archives.
I remember when you said that.
And the National Archives is an orphan agency, unfortunately. And down at that end is where the money and the energy is and where the focus is. And yet our real challenge, I think, as citizens, as people who care about open government and transparent and accountable government, is to turn the archives role from that orphan agency out in the hinterland into being an integral part of the information technology development on which we're spending $40, $60, $80 billion a year, so that it's a seamless piece. So we're not saying to Mr. Ferriero, okay, pick up the mess after we've created all these very different legacy systems, all these different forms of metadata, all these different kinds of software and hardware. You got to save the historically important stuff that's important to individuals and for history. But you aren't integrated with what Mr. Kundra is doing. And I think at one of our previous discussions, I suggested that the concept we should be after for that integration is something that you see on personal computers today, an automatic built-in backup process at the time that you're running your network or at the time you're running your Ethernet. The Apple Mac has a time capsule function where I never have to back up my little computer. It, every day, is listening to my computer when I log on the net, looking for a new file or an updated file and automatically saving it. The role the National Archives should play 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now should be the backup hard drive for the whole federal government. But to get from where it is today, orphan agencies spending only maybe $400 million a year and in a cleanup after the parade mode is going to be permanent failure unless it switches over and becomes that backup hard drive on the net for the whole federal government. To me, that's the great kind of challenge, I think, institutionally.
All right. Thank you.
I'll leave you with that.
Mr. Wonderlich, last word.
Thank you. So, to me, I think we're at a really transformative moment for at least two reasons. One is because the gap between people's expectations and what the government is delivering is at an all-time high. If you look at our experience as consumers or shoppers or students, it's very different from our experience as citizens. And the other reason is the way that President Obama raised the issue on the campaign trail of transparency and promised very big things about changing the way the government works. And that leaves us in a situation where the press and the public are very hungry for an evaluation. And it would be really simple right now to try to assign a pass-fail grade. And to me, I think that would be an enormous mistake, because what's happening is much more important and much more complicated than you could evaluate with a simple pass or a fail. So I think the challenge that I see right now is to take these transparency issues, which are really some of the things that people care most about, like earmarks or the way federal money is spent or the way influence works in Washington or the way our decisions are made, and keep the momentum that's happening now moving forward in a way that is meaningful but also recognizes the complexity of the challenge. So as evaluators, I think that's the challenge that we have right now.
All right, thank you. I'll go back to where I started off, and it is just to thank you for coming back and finding time in your schedules to be with us now a second time, and to actually have a chance to share your thoughts with us and to respond to our questions and actually reflect on what each of you have to offer. But we thank you for that. When my wife asked me this evening, she says, "Well, how was that hearing that you were going to hold today?" I'm going to say it was fun. And it also turned out to be, I think, highly informative. And we thank you for making it that way and sort of holding our attention and giving us some good insights going down the road. We discussed a lot of important issues that, although to most of us and to a lot of people in this country, they seem fairly abstract, but they can also lead to real-world impacts. And for example, one area that we've been focusing with the help of Eric Hopkins over my left shoulder, and Deirdre down here to his left. But one of the areas that we've been focusing our efforts on is over budget IT systems that many times just don't deliver what they were supposed to have delivered. And I was happy to hear last month that because of our efforts, the Veterans Administration terminated, I believe, over $50 million in bad investments, and the Department of Homeland Security will be finishing a review soon that also may lead them to start cutting some of their dead weight. We need to expand this kind of accountability to most, if not all, investments that our agencies undertake. I'm also here that the Obama administration is leveraging the private sector to come up with new and even exciting ways to use massive amounts of government information. This type of thinking, I believe, recognize that our government isn't the only one with good ideas. In fact, many times it's the average citizen, or the above average citizen maybe, who knows where the problems lie and maybe has some pretty good ideas on how to fix them. So as we leave here today, I hope we won't stop discussing these issues. I think we won't. In fact, I want to invite our witnesses, or anyone else for that matter, who might share our interest in these matters, to submit their ideas on ways to improve how our agencies are operating and to reduce wasteful spending. Now, usually my colleagues who are unable to be here today will submit some questions for the record, and if you do receive them, Eric, how long do folks have to submit? 2 weeks. So my colleagues have as much as 2 weeks to submit questions, and if you'd be so kind as to respond to them promptly, we would be grateful for that. You'll make a good team, and we appreciate very much you're taking your time to share your, not just part of your afternoon, but some really good ideas with all of us. And with that having been said, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.